Dog Holes, Episode 1. Every once in a while digging through public domain books, you stumble across something completely unexpected. Today's dog hole comes from an 1880 book called A Comic History of the United States. Now, before we begin, there's one important thing to understand. The historical events surrounding Benedict Arnold, Major John Andre, and the plot to surrender West Point are very real. The dog isn't. The chapter you're about to hear is satire. It's the author imagining a completely fictional way one of America's greatest traders might have received a warning after Major Andre was captured. I'll pause a few times during the reading to separate history from the author's imagination. Let's begin. A Comic History of the United States by Livingston Hopkins, copiously illustrated by the author from sketches taken at a safe distance. Copyrighted 1880 by L. Hopkins. Chapter 22. Imprudent Conduct of Benedict Arnold. A real estate speculation. $50,000, the price of liberty. Terms cash. Major Andre is seriously compromised. Suspense. Evil communication. A tail-bearing yellow dog. It was in the fall of 1780 that one Benedict Arnold, being seriously inconvenienced for want of funds, employed some very questionable means of getting on his financial legs again. After laying his head together for a spell, he resolved to realize on some real estate belonging to the colonial government and make a European tour on the proceeds. He secretly negotiated with the British commander, Lord Clinton, then at New York, for the sale of a few acres at West Point, where he, Arnold, happened to be in command, which he agreed to transfer to the said Lord Clinton for and in consideration of $50,000 to him, the said Arnold, paid in hand. It is true the property was occupied by government as a military post of some importance, and was a repository of valuable stores and munitions of war, and besides the nucleus of the American army was garrisoned there. But Arnold was too much of a man of business to let a little drawback of that sort stand between him and a bargain. He said he would throw all of these in if the other party was willing. The other party good-naturedly agreed to overlook all drawbacks, and sent his man Friday, Major Andre, to close the bargain and bring the property home. After a very pleasant interview with Arnold behind a haystack, which resulted to the satisfaction of both, Major Andre started for New York with the title deed for the newly acquired property safely stowed away in his left coat-tail pocket. Let's pause here for a moment. Although the author immediately starts making jokes, this much is true. Benedict Arnold had become one of the Continental Army's most respected officers. He had fought bravely. He had been wounded. He had helped secure one of the Revolution's greatest victories at Saratoga. But by 1780, he was deeply frustrated. He believed Congress had treated him unfairly. He was heavily in debt, and eventually he secretly agreed to surrender West Point to the British. Everything you've heard so far is built on real history. Now, let's continue. He had proceeded some distance on his journey when he was stopped by 3 American gentlemen whom he met, and who, with that unhappy inquisitiveness to which their race is notoriously predisposed, desired information as to whence he had come, whither he was going, and what line he was in. The Major, with great ingenuity, replied that he was a representative of the press from New York, and had been headed to headquarters to interview General Washington as to what he thought his chances were in the coming presidential canvass, and whether he, as an honest man, really considered himself a fit person to be entrusted with an army. And if it were true, as had been represented, that he advocated the introduction of the new breech-loading umbrellas into the army as a military measure, whether he was not afraid of hurting himself with his sword, or putting somebody's eye out by the careless habit he had of pointing out beauties in the landscape with that weapon. Also, whether he had any chewing tobacco. However plausibly the Major's account of himself might strike most people, it failed to satisfy those to whom it was addressed. They said they had at first merely looked upon him as a suspicious character, but now, by his own confessed connection with the press, they could not regard him in any other light than that of a very dangerous person, to say the least, and they must trouble him to turn his pockets inside out. With tears in his eyes, he took from his pockets an aureoled watch, a jackknife, and some eerie railway shares. "Let me go hence," he said, in a voice choked with emotion, "and these shall be your guerdons. There is just a guerdon apiece. You can toss up among you for the choice." But although his captors happened to be wealthy capitalists, they declined to add to their means at the expense of honor. They said guerdons were out of their line, and demanded to know if he, the Major, could discern anything of a verdant tinge in their optics. The Major could not for the life of him. One of these low fellows then hinted that he more than suspected the true nature of their now prisoner, and he must be investigated, and further, by a very expressive pantomime, catching himself by the throat, opening his eyes very wide, protruding his tongue, and breathing hard, tried to convey some idea of what would happen if his suspicions should prove correct. The gallant Major was never so mortified in his life before. He began to wonder what would ever become of him if these vulgar persons into whose hands he had fallen should really so far misconstrue his conduct as to condemn him for a spy. He was not kept long in suspense. Another quick pause. Major André really was captured by 3 American militiamen. Hidden inside his clothing, they discovered papers describing Arnold's plan. Those documents destroyed the entire operation. Arnold managed to escape. André did not. Everything from this point forward is where the author begins having fun. There is one incident in connection with André's capture which has always been unaccountably overlooked by other historians, and which if we omitted in this place, we should feel that we had not conscientiously discharged our duty. When Major André found himself a captive, he felt that it would be very desirable to communicate with Arnold before their transactions should be made public. He also saw the impossibility of reaching him by telegraph, as that means of correspondence was not to be invented until half a century or more later, and to delay so long as that might be fatal. Imagine the problem. It's 1780. No telegraph, no telephone, no radio, no cars, no airplanes. If you're suddenly arrested, how do you secretly warn your co-conspirator before soldiers arrive? The real answer is you probably don't. But this author has another idea. While casting about for some means of giving warning to his friend, his eye chanced to rest upon a specimen of the canine species of the yellow persuasion belonging to one of his captors, and a ray of hope gleamed in upon his soul. They had halted for the night, intending to proceed with the prisoner to headquarters next morning, and preparations were being made for supper. An empty tin coffee pot sat near the fire, and the yellow dog sat near the tin coffee pot, blinking at the fire, his mind evidently absorbed in some abstruse canine problem. By a curious, though perhaps natural association of ideas, the Briton saw here the crude materials for communicating with Arnold ready to his hand. Pretending to make an entry in his diary, he hastily scribbled off these lines. Friend Benedict, owing to circumstances over which I have no control, I am unable to take any further steps in that little matter of ours at present. The boys have in point of fact scooped me up. You would have been a better man in my place. Hoping to meet you in the happy hunting grounds, I am yours, in limbo, Andre. P.S. By the way, hadn't you better drop in upon our mutual friend, General Clinton, at New York, and remain with him for a few days until it blows over? I only throw this out at a mere suggestion. Goodbye, A. Watching his opportunity when his captors' backs were turned, the Major slipped this epistle into the coffee pot, clapped on the lid, and having diverted the canine's attention by means of a piece of salt pork, which had been originally laid out for the approaching meal, hastily appended the tin vessel to his caudal extremity, and having with nice precision turned the animal's nose in the direction of Arnold's tent, he gave the tail an agonizing twist, and the party did without coffee that night. The yellow dog came duly to hand, and Mr. Arnold was not slow in acting upon the hint contained in the message he brought. With that long-headedness which is the characteristic of the true man of business, he anticipated any investigation of his conduct that might follow by resigning and changing his residence at once. We learn that he subsequently went to Europe, but up to the present writing has not yet returned. If anyone doubts the incident we have just related about the way in which the news of Andre's capture reached Arnold, he has only to narrowly scrutinize our illustration, which treats of the moment when the sagacious quadruped reaches the American lines. With almost human intelligence, he overturns the sentinel who, doubtful of the nature of his business, has challenged his further progress. For Mr. Arnold's own sake, we regret the imprudent course he pursued to improve the state of his exchequer. It is true his funds were low, and no one can blame him for wanting to make a raise. But then he ought to have remembered that there are always honest as well as lucrative pursuits open to the deserving poor, involving but small investments. For instance, he might have started a paper, peddled matches, gotten an appointment in the cabinet, blacked boots, organized savings banks, or written comic histories. We are aware that these invaluable suggestions come too late to apply specifically to Mr. Arnold's case, but we do hope that all who have invested capital in this book will shape their course by the few hints we have thrown out, And above all, remember that the plucking out of even the tail feathers of the American eagle for commercial purposes is ever attended with risk. On a more thorough investigation of the subject, we learn that Benedict Arnold is dead and has been for some time, but he lives in American history. I think this is my favorite part of the chapter, not because anyone believed it happened, but because it tells us something about the people reading this book in 1880, nearly 100 years after the Revolution. Everyone already knew Benedict Arnold's story. His name had already become synonymous with betrayal. That meant the author didn't have to explain anything. Instead, he could simply imagine the most ridiculous solution possible and trust his readers to get the joke. Sometimes old books teach us history. Sometimes they teach us how people remembered history. This chapter is a perfect example. The Revolution is real. Benedict Arnold is real. Major Andre is real. The yellow dog never existed. But the fact that someone wrote this story in 1880 and expected readers to laugh tells us something about American memory. History wasn't just something people studied, it was something they joked about. And occasionally, dogs found their way into those jokes. That's one of the reasons I enjoy digging through these forgotten books. Not every story belongs in a history textbook, but every once in a while you uncover something that's simply too good to stay buried. Thanks for joining me for another Dog Hole. I'm Andrea LaGrow, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed today's forgotten story, be sure to check out our documentary series, America 250, The Dogs, where we tell the story of the United States through the dogs that helped shape it. And don't forget to subscribe. There are more Dog Holes coming up next week.